The skyscraper towered into the night sky, its glass walls shimmering under the streetlights. Inside, most of the employees had already gone home. The once busy floors, where laughter and footsteps had echoed just hours before, were now silent except for the faint hum of machines left on standby. At the far end of the 32nd floor, the cleaning crew worked in pairs, but Aisha was alone. Her colleagues had finished their share and left early, but she had stayed behind, as always, to make sure the work was perfect. She couldn't afford complaints, not when this job was the only thread holding her fragile life together. She pushed her cleaning cart slowly down the hall, her wrists aching, her shoulders heavy from exhaustion. Every corner of her body begged for rest, but her mind kept whispering about her daughter, Noor. Noor's school fees were due in 3 days, and the landlord had already hinted at another rent increase. Aisha's chest tightened every time she thought of it, but she kept going. She always did. As she walked past the executive wing, she noticed a light still burning in the corner office. Most nights, that office was locked up long before she arrived, but tonight, the golden glow spilled across the hallway. She hesitated. It was the CEO's office. Rayyan Malik. Even the name made people nervous. The youngest billionaire in the city, he was known for his sharp business instincts and even sharper tongue. Employees whispered that he could cut down a man's confidence with a single look. He was brilliant, yes, but cold, like a winter storm wrapped in an expensive suit. Aisha had never spoken to him directly. She'd only seen him in passing, surrounded by assistants and security, his presence commanding every room he entered. She had once overheard a secretary say, "Mr. Malik doesn't waste time on people who don't matter." To Aisha, that was enough reason to stay invisible. But tonight, as she wheeled her cart past the door, she heard something strange. Not the steady tapping of a keyboard or the clipped voice of someone on a call. No, it was softer, an uneven exhale, like someone trying not to break. She paused. Her instincts told her to move on. The last thing she needed was to upset the CEO. But another part of her, the part that had always reached out when Noor scraped her knees or when a stranger on the bus looked lost, held her in place. Slowly, she knocked on the half-open door. "Sir." Her voice was barely above a whisper. Inside, Rayyan sat behind his massive mahogany desk. His suit jacket hung loosely over the chair, his tie was loosened, and his hair, usually immaculate, was slightly ruffled. Papers were scattered across the desk, some crumpled at the edges as though he had clenched them in his fists. He looked up sharply. His eyes, dark and piercing, locked onto hers. For a moment, Aisha regretted opening her mouth. "I'm sorry," she stammered. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'll just come back later." But instead of dismissing her, his jaw tightened. "No, do your work. Don't mind me." Aisha nodded quickly, pushing her cart inside. She pulled out her dusting cloth and quietly began wiping the shelves, careful to keep her distance. Still, she couldn't help glancing at him in the reflection of the glass. His posture was rigid, but his eyes weren't on his papers. They were on a photo frame placed just beside his computer. A little girl smiled out from behind the glass. Her arms were wrapped tightly around Rayyan's neck, her tiny face lit with pure joy. His fingers brushed against the frame, and for the briefest moment, his face softened. But then, as if catching himself, he pulled his hand back and leaned away, his expression hardening again like a wall being rebuilt. Aisha swallowed. She knew that look. She had seen it on her own face in the bathroom mirror after Noor went to bed, the look of someone hiding cracks so deep, they were afraid the whole world would fall inside. She wiped another shelf, debating with herself. She wasn't supposed to talk. She wasn't supposed to see him as anything other than her employer. But sometimes silence was heavier than words. Finally, she whispered, "Sir, if you don't mind me saying, you look like you're hurting." The pen in his hand froze mid-stroke. Slowly, he lifted his gaze to her. "Excuse me." His voice was cold, but underneath it, there was a flicker, surprise. Aisha's heart pounded, but she continued softly. "I know I'm just a janitor. And I probably have no right to say this. But sometimes, when life feels too heavy, what we need isn't money or power. It isn't even sleep. Sometimes, all we need is a hug." The words hung in the air like fragile glass, ready to shatter. Rayyan stared at her as though she had spoken another language. He was used to people begging for promotions, contracts, favors. They wanted his wealth, his influence, his signature on paper. But this woman, standing there in her faded uniform with tired eyes, hadn't asked him for anything he could buy. Aisha lowered her gaze, her cheeks warm with embarrassment. "Forgive me, sir, I didn't mean," she gestured nervously, her rag twisting in her hands. "It's just, I saw the picture of your daughter. And I thought, maybe what you need isn't another deal or another late night. Maybe what you need is what she gives you. A hug that has no conditions, no questions. Just love." Rayyan's throat tightened. Memories he had locked away rushed back. His daughter, Aaliyah, running into his arms when she was small, giggling as she pressed her face into his neck. Back then, her hugs had been his anchor. But after the divorce, after the endless board meetings and missed weekends, those hugs had grown rare. Now, when Aaliyah visited, she smiled politely. She called him dad, but her arms rarely reached for him anymore. The silence stretched. His chest rose and fell unevenly, and for the first time in years, he didn't know what to say. "Leave," he whispered finally. Aisha froze. "Sir, leave," he repeated, but this time, his voice trembled. Not with anger, but with something dangerously close to grief. She nodded quickly, gathering her cloths and pushing her cart out of the office, her heart heavy. But what she didn't know was that her words had already struck deep. For the first time in years, Rayyan Malik, the man who believed he could buy anything, felt the weight of something he couldn't purchase. A hug, one simple hug, and that night, as he sat alone in his office, staring at his daughter's photograph, the cold-hearted CEO realized just how much he missed it. The following week moved in a blur for Rayyan Malik. His calendar was full, back-to-back meetings, negotiations with international partners, and endless calls that stretched into the night. Yet, no matter how many contracts he signed or deals he secured, his mind kept circling back to that quiet voice in his office. "Sometimes, all we need is a hug." The janitor's words shouldn't have mattered. He had heard countless people talk, investors, employees, competitors, but nobody had ever spoken to him that way, with no agenda, no request for money or favors. Just honesty. Each night, as he sat alone in his penthouse overlooking the glittering city, he felt the emptiness gnaw at him. The walls were lined with art, the floors with Persian rugs, but none of it filled the silence. His daughter's laughter echoed in his memory, sharp and bittersweet. Aaliyah had called last week, asking if he would attend her school recital. He had mumbled something about a very important board meeting, and promised, next time. But what if there wasn't a next time? For the first time in years, Rayyan felt fear, not of failure or bankruptcy, but of losing his daughter's love completely. One evening, as he was leaving the office later than usual, he saw a familiar figure in the lobby. Aisha. She was bent over her cleaning cart, moving slower than usual. Her skin looked pale, her eyes ringed with exhaustion. As she reached for a mop, her hand trembled, and she pressed it against her stomach as though steadying herself. Before he could stop himself, Rayyan crossed the marble floor toward her. "Are you all right?" Aisha straightened quickly, startled. She tried to smile. "I'm fine, sir. Just a little dizzy. Long hours." But even as she spoke, her knees buckled. She staggered, and before she could fall, Rayyan caught her. For a man used to balancing billion-dollar empires, holding a fainting janitor in his arms felt strangely grounding. She was light, fragile, far too thin, as though the weight of the world had been pressing down on her body for years. Without hesitation, he rushed her to the hospital. The sterile white walls, the scent of antiseptic, the steady beeping of monitors. Rayyan hated hospitals. They reminded him of the day his father had passed, years ago. But now, sitting in the waiting room, pacing back and forth like an anxious relative, he realized he had willingly walked into one for someone who technically meant nothing to him. Yet she did mean something. When the doctor finally emerged, Rayyan stepped forward quickly. "How is she?" "She's stable," the doctor said. "But she's malnourished. Severe exhaustion. It's clear she hasn't been eating properly or resting." Rayyan's brows knitted. Why would she neglect her health like that? The doctor sighed. "It's not neglect. It's sacrifice. She's been working double shifts and cutting back on meals. Likely to save money. You'd be surprised how often we see this with single parents. Single parent. The word struck him like a blow. He thought of Aaliyah again. What if she had been born into that kind of struggle? When Aisha finally opened her eyes, she looked around nervously until her gaze landed on him. Sir, what are you doing here? You fainted, he said simply, sitting beside her bed. I brought you here. Her face flushed with embarrassment. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to trouble you. You didn't trouble me, he replied, almost sharply. Then, softer, but you should have told someone. You should have taken care of yourself. She gave a small, tired smile. Mothers don't get that luxury, sir. If I spend money on myself, what happens to my daughter? Noor's school fees are due this week. I can't let her dreams slip because of me. Rayyan was silent. He had spent fortunes on boardroom luxuries, yet here was a woman collapsing because she skipped meals to keep her child in school. Does Noor know? He asked quietly. No, Aisha whispered. She's just a child. I don't want her to worry. I want her to believe the world is kinder than it really is. For the first time in years, something burned behind his eyes. He looked away, blinking hard. You've done more than enough, she continued softly. Even bringing me here, I'm grateful. But please don't think I want anything else. I don't want money. Her voice grew weaker, but her words struck harder. All I ever wanted was for someone to hold me the way I hold Noor. The way your daughter holds you. Because sometimes that's all we need to survive the hardest days. Rayyan couldn't breathe. The lump in his throat was too heavy. She was right. It wasn't money that healed wounds. It was love, and he realized with a jolt how little he had given his own daughter. 2 days later, Rayyan did something his board members never expected. He canceled a meeting with international investors and drove across the city to a small primary school. The teachers, shocked to see him, ushered him to the auditorium. The recital had already started. Children stood on stage, reciting lines, singing, dancing. But Rayyan's eyes searched only for one face. And then he saw her. Aaliyah, his daughter. Her small face scanned the audience, hopeful, then dimmed when she didn't see him. She turned back to the stage, her shoulders drooping slightly. But then, as he stepped inside, her gaze found him. Her eyes widened, her lips parted, and when the performance ended, before anyone could stop her, she ran straight into the crowd, straight into his arms. For the first time in years, Rayyan bent down and caught her, lifting her off the ground, holding her tightly. Aaliyah buried her face in his neck, her small arms clinging to him with all the strength she had. The auditorium blurred, the applause faded. All he felt was the warmth of his daughter's hug. It was everything he had been missing. The next weeks changed him. He spent weekends with Aaliyah, not in expensive hotels but in parks, baking messy cookies, reading bedtime stories. Slowly, the ice around his heart began to thaw. But he didn't forget Aisha. He visited her at the office, offering her a new position, administrative staff, better pay, reasonable hours. At first, she refused. Sir, I told you, I don't want charity. This isn't charity, he said firmly. It's recognition. People like you keep this company standing. And your daughter deserves a mother who comes home healthy. Aisha hesitated, then finally nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. Months later, at a company charity gala, reporters crowded around Rayyan. Cameras flashed. One bold journalist asked, Mr. Malik, you've built an empire worth billions. In your opinion, what's the most valuable thing in life? Everyone leaned forward, expecting him to say success or power. Instead, his gaze drifted across the room, where Aisha stood in a modest dress, Noor's small hand tucked in hers. He thought of his daughter's arms around his neck, the warmth of that hug. The most valuable thing, he said slowly, is something money can never buy. A hug, the kind that reminds you you're still human. The cameras clicked furiously. His answer stunned the world. But Aisha understood, because she was the one who had planted those words in his heart, and unknowingly, had helped him find his way back to love. And from that day on, the cold CEO was never the same again.